Hey everybody, Questwise here. Today is part one of our Magic series. So we're talking about magic in role-playing games. Next week we'll be having a special guest. We'll be streaming live on Hangouts with Ivan Mike 1968 talking about magic. And then in part three will be a wrap-up where we'll talk about magic in games such as Rifts and Starfinder and a few other games where magic and technology are sort of blended together. But today, I want to focus on a few different games that I think are distinctly different and or have very interesting magic systems used in the role playing in their system specifically. First of all, let's start off with a little treatise on what is magic as it applies to role-playing games. I've always been fascinated by magic, and I've always been fascinated by the folklore and the mythology behind magic. And to see how, I always get very excited about seeing how different role-playing games sort of institute magic into their systems and how they play it out. If you watch some of my other videos and stuff, you know that I'm a huge fantasy junkie. And any games that sort of emulate the sort of old school Renaissance, the OSR kind of mode, always intrigued me. And I've played, I'm a huge fan of science fiction as well too, Star Wars, all that kind of stuff in role-playing games. But fantasy is my genre, and so magic systems are always fascinating to me and see how magic is treated. On a personal level, I believe that magic in role-playing games should be something that is mysterious. I think it should be something that is very powerful and can be used in a way to tell some really great stories. I think that magic users, whether they be wizards or druids or clerics or what have you, should have a very sort of distinctive and important role when it comes to role-playing games. In that, because they're using magic, they tend to stand out from the crowd, and they will be recognized rather easily and held in awe and respect and or fear in the communities in which they play in. So magic in role-playing games. I guess as a treatise of sort of a historical, what is magic? In this sense, I can't really say, that there's that idea that magic is simply technology far beyond understanding that idea. I can't remember the exact quote. But in this instance, I think it plays a little bit of a different role. In depending on what game you're playing, say, and this is not one that we'll be touching on today, but, like games like Ars Magica, which isn't sort of a more mainstream game, but Ars Magica is a game that takes place in sort of a mythical Europe, where magic is sort of more of a scientific pursuit, in which that you can simply, you're using different elements and almost alchemy to create magical effects. Now, let's start off a little bit further back with some of the classics. And we'll start off with D&D. This is the 5th edition of the Player's Handbook, but D&D, throughout its entire history, has always used the same variation on magic, and which has come to be coined the Vancian system, due to Gary Gygax's love of the Jack Vance novels, the Dying Earth novels, and the way that the magic was depicted in those things. What does that mean, Vancian magic? Well, in the Vancian system, a character must have spells available to them, say either in a spell book or a scroll, and they must memorize those spells. They must take time to sit down with their trusty little spell book and memorize these spells. Once the spells are memorized, and they're only able to memorize a certain number per their level, usually per level in these games, once they've memorized those many spells, they're sort of in there. They're in your brain. They're there. They're ready to be called up at any time. Though the drawback is that once the spell is cast, it's completely erased from your memory. There's no way for you to recall the incantation, and thus you must take time to re-memorize the spells. You get a certain number of spells per your level, depending upon your level. Spellcasters tend to start out in D&D anyway. They tend to start out very weak compared to fighters and or other characters. They can't wear any armor. They can't use usually swords or anything bigger than say a staff or a dagger. Though those things have changed over time. There are ways that you can get the Gandalf effect by taking a feat or a skill that allows your wizard or your magic user to use a sword of some type, or like the warlock can use a warlock's blade, packed blade, things a little bit bigger than the thing. But generally, you wizards can't wear armor or anything. Clerics can, and we'll get into that distinction between that in a few minutes. So wizards tend to start out a little weak. They tend to be a little bit at the back of the party. They only have a few spells, and once those spells are used up for the day, it's very hard to regain them unless you take a rest. Storytelling-wise, it's complicated. It complicates things, or at least it makes things a little bit more difficult, especially in a world like D&D, where magic is everywhere. I hate to diss on D&D because I'm a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons, but after so many years of playing it, I grew very tired of the Vancian system. The idea of sort of memorizing a spell, casting a spell, memorizing a spell, casting spells. And wizards do, over time, become very, very powerful. But with a world that is so... And again, you don't have to play it this way. And I will do a separate video on my sort of dissection of how I prefer to run role-playing games. But you don't have to play it this way. But that repetition of memorizing and casting spells, and that the fact that the world innately in D&D is very, very magical, and to have magic users start off sort of as weak as they do. Although in 5th edition they are a little bit better than they are some of the traditional earlier versions of D&D. It still seems clunky. It seems unless depending on how your dungeon master's running the world, it seems like magic is not that flashy. It's not that mysterious. It's not that dangerous. It's not that awe-filled experience that I feel it should be. The other thing, the difference between in Dungeons and Dragons, especially in 5th edition and any of the other things, is that there's this weird distinction between, or very slim distinction between clerical magic, religious magic, and or arcane magic. It's really just a flavor. Basically, the spells, a lot of them overlap. A wizard's not going to be casting clerical spells or like healing spells, where a cleric's not going to be throwing fireballs and such. They feel very similar. They feel, though the flavor's a little bit different, I feel that there's not a great enough distinction between the two. Again, my own personal opinion. And again, it's really up to the dungeon master who's running the game as well too to make those distinctions more prevalent. A lot of times, people play clerics just because you get that World of Warcraft sort of plug and play idea of like, we need a tank, we need a healer, we need a blah blah blah, and I can't stand playing that way. If you want to, if the group wants to play an entire campaign with characters that are all just fighters or all just rogues or all just magic users, I find that exciting. I want that to happen, and I think that you can build a great story around that. I get very, and I've run games like that, and it's fine to run one-off games, but to run entire campaigns in that kind of World of Warcraft style, where every role needs to be fit and plugged and played, sort of frustrates me a little bit. But so anyhow, this isn't really supposed to be a video about my personal preferences, but on how magic works in D&D. Is the Vancian system, in which you have access to a written spell, you memorize it, it's removed from your memory, and so on. Next up is Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and if you watch my little preview video of the Magic series that we're doing, you saw my little outtake on Lamentations. What's interesting about Lamentations is that James Raggi, who's the author of this, has taken the idea of the Vancian system from D&D and made it more mysterious. He's made it more dangerous. He's made it more epic and mythical feeling, and by using the same system, which kind of goes back to my point of how the Dungeon Master sort of can kind of control how the game is played. This world, while filled with magic, is filled with magic that's of a sort of folklorisk, mythical type feeling. The spells in this are dangerous. They are unpredictable, especially if you're using the free RPG Day supplement, which I affectionately refer to as VAM. You get the aspect that maybe only women should be able to cast spells, and or it's very dangerous to cast any spells at all, and or there might not be any spell levels and you can cast any spell you want as long as you can have access to it. And a lot of the spells in here are reflections of spells that you'll find in things such as Dungeons and Dragons. It does use like the OSR license, but they've been tweaked and they've been changed. For instance, the summon spell in here, like I talked about in the previous video, takes up several pages. If you miscast summon while you're trying to draw something out from the other world, horrible, horrible, horrible things could happen. You could summon greater demons. You could summon some kind of aberration from the outer planes. Something could just step out and swallow you whole and disappear, or you could wreak havoc upon the entire continent. And summons a first level spell if you're using the spell level system. So what James Raggi has done in Lamentations of Flame Princess is taken the Vancian idea and made it very much more mysterious and a lot more dangerous. And I love that a lot. I like that. It's a very good variation on the Vancian system. I appreciate that very, very much. Next up, one of my all-time favorite games. I will profess my love for this game until the end of my days. Palladium Fantasy Role-Playing Game. What Kevin and everybody over at Palladium has done with this game, as far as magic, to me feels right. To me feels what I expect from a game. Magic is a little bit rare in this world, and if you do encounter magic in this world, it is very powerful and it can be very dangerous, and it's very thematic, and it has lots of flavor. I like the way that the spells are named in this. They feel very thematic, and it feels like it very fits this theme very well and the world setting in Palladium Fantasy. But again, magic is difficult. It's difficult to use, it's difficult to find, and it's powered in a completely different way. Magic in Palladium, they start off more powerful than they do in D&D, excuse me. And they tend to be real contenders right out of the gate. They can stand toe-to-toe with some of the stronger other races in the book, or classes in the book as well, which I find very, very nice. Again, the stats might not be any different. They might just be normal humans and or whatever race you pick. But the power of the magic is higher. And he does away with the idea of the Vancian system in which you must memorize a spell and then, cast it, and you have to rememorize it, and it becomes forgotten, and uses what's called PPE, or potential psychic energy. Everybody has PPE, though those trained in magic tend to be able to sort of draw more of that from themselves and sort of harness it in a way that they can use their own sort of inner psychic endurance, their own energy to cast these spells. Sometimes this PPE, this potential psychic energy, can be raised by being near a specific font of magic, be it a ley line or something akin to that, or some kind of a magical artifact that projects more PPE or allows you to tap more of it. And as your character grows, you unlock more of that. You learn more about yourself and about magic, and you're able to harness more potential psychic energy in order to cast these spells. So this is a point by system, basically. Each spell has a cost, and you are able to choose so many spells per level that you are able to learn, which fits a little bit in the Vancian system. But once you learn them, you can cast them as many times as you want, as long as you have PPE left in order to cast them. So it's sort of a mana idea where you have a certain starting amount and you're deducting that. And then over time, over rest, you're able to gain that back and you're able to cast again. So a little bit of variance on the Vancian idea, but I like it a lot better. It feels a little bit more intuitive. It feels a little less clunky. It would be nice to see D&D maybe do a little bit of an overhaul. And they do have some variations on this in the Dungeon Master's Guide in Dungeons & Dragons, where you can kind of get that feel. You can use more of a mana point, spell point type system. It's always been, I mean, from the very beginning, it's been a Palladium thing. And you'll see it throughout their entire game system, throughout the Megaverse system. And we'll get into that into part 3 when we get to that video, where we talk about rifts and how magic works in their science fiction games as well too. So one of my all-time favorites. Love this game. Love the company, and I think the magic system in the list to me is my favorite system and the way to do it. The other thing that's really great about this is they give you a variety of magic users. Now D&D, you have a few. You've got wizard, you've got warlock, you've got what else is in there? And then you got the cleric, the idea of the cleric in there, the druid, sorcerer, of course, drawing this from sorcerer. And this, you get this. These ones feel a little bit more historic. I don't know if that's the right word, but you have people like the Diabolist in here who work in circles. You have the witch who draws power from other things. You have you have a warlock in here as well too. The wizard, more of an arcane study using scrolls and such. Awesome section in here. I want to show this to you guys. Of magical symbols. It has a lot of this and stuff of that stuff in here, as well as when you get into the Diabolist and the Summoner and stuff, a great selection of summoning circles and their descriptions and such as well. So my undying love for Palladium Fantasy. Now, finally, in today's part, in part 1 of this, I want to talk about a game which takes Magic to a completely different level, and does it in such a way that it makes it feel extremely dangerous, extremely mysterious, and extremely unique. And that is Call of Cthulhu. This is the new 7th edition by Chaosium. Magic in here is phenomenal. The idea of being a sort of modern-esque human world, Earth. You can play it in the 1920s. You can play it in any time period, any era, which is kind of great. The main rulebook kind of feeds upon either the 1920s era, which is the classical Lovecraftian era, or the modern era. But there are source books out there to play in ancient Rome and the Viking era. Any era you can imagine can be done with the system within Earth. Magic in this game is very otherworldly. It is very dangerous. It's not meant to be played with by humans. And yet somehow we stumbled upon it and were able to sort of vaguely harness it in ways that we're able to get some sort of an effect from the magic. Be it from some sort of magical talisman. Most likely there's an entire section in here on mythos tomes that are books of spells and rituals that will either draw some sort of ability, some sort of magical effect from the air, from the ether, wherever, from some kind of unknown dimension. When you cast these spells, there's always a potential chance that you will lose part of yourself, that you will lose part of your mental stamina, your sanity will be stripped away, because magic is never meant to be toyed with by mortal beings. It's not ours. We didn't create it. Where it comes from doesn't really talk about in this. It could be from the great old ones. It could be from the elves. Who know? I mean, who knows where it came from? This is set on Earth, and it's a mystical force that's sort of being conjured up, and it was never meant for us to be toyed with. So the idea of casting a spell or learning any of these, even sometimes even just reading the book the spells are in, will strip away your sanity. Again, it uses magic points. Every character has a power level that allows them to have sort of magic points. Power being sort of your fortitude to stand against things like, you know, encountering monsters and stuff, or some kind of a psychic attack or some kind of magical ability. The higher your power, the more you're able to sort of sustain being in contact with these eldritch forces. And so if you have a lower stat in that, it's going to be, you know, casting a spell is going to be much more dangerous to you physically as well as mentally. Casting spells costs magic points. It costs sanity. There's a lot of components sometimes involved in this. Sometimes the spells are not instantaneous. A lot of times in these kind of games, there are a lot of spells that are instantaneous. And because a lot of these games are sort of based upon, you know, combat for majority of their system is designed around, spells need to be fast. They need to be flashy. They need to be quick. So it either takes an instantaneous amount of time, or it takes one turn or one round or whatever. Sometimes in Call of Cthulhu, a lot of the spells will be rituals in which will take an hour to cast, or a day to cast, or even a week. If you read like the Dunwich Horror, which is included in this game, actually I think it's in the player's guide, but they include that short story where it takes like a coverage of a month to summon this creature from you know, the netherworld. So it's very interesting the way that the Call of Cthulhu portrays magic. It's very, very dangerous. It's very, very dark. That you are endangering not only yourself but the entire world by casting these spells. It's a very unique way to do spells. I find that very, very interesting. It would be interesting to see a fantasy game do that same sort of aspect, where magic is extremely rare, and you know it's very, very rare that it's going to be, you know, discovered and or very powerful when it's cast. I've been currently working on a little mini campaign that's set during the Salem witch trials, using Lamentations of the Flame Princess, as well as the ideas behind the free RPG Day expansion for this, in which that's the case, where magic, every spell has a chance to miscast, and if it's not cast correctly, horrible things can happen to the caster, as well as to the people and places, things around them. If I've missed anything today in this video, if you guys have enjoyed this and you know of any other games that use magic in a very exciting and different way, please let me know. Just a reminder, next Monday, I'll be having a live chat with Ivan Mike 1968. Hopefully we can get that worked out and worked up together. But we're planning on doing that next week, and we're going to be talking about magic and role-playing games. And then in part 3, which will be 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about magic again and wrapping up this 3-part series on magic and RPGs, where I'm going to talk about things like more classic types of magic, like things from Dungeon Crawl Classics. I will probably tap into some more Ars Magica and talk about how magic is more of a science type thing works. We'll be going into things like Burning Wheel, and how Burning Wheel treats games, or treats magic in its system, as well as using role-playing games to tell a science fiction story with magic involved as well too. So think Rifts and Starfinder. We'll be focusing more on Rifts and how that interacts as well too, and how Palladium does their sort of magic system that flows across their entire Megaverse line. Anyway, that's it for today. Magic Part 1, Magic in the Air Part 1. Everybody, thanks for watching. I'm Questwise, and we're out.